I have an important announcement to everyone watching this video. In a few moments, you will be greeted with the ability to learn Illumination Software Creator from scratch. This is amazing. You can make Linux applications and Android applications like nobody's business. Unfortunately, whoever was recording the audio really screwed up bad. They did a bad job. That's all I gotta say.
Introduction to Illumination Software Creator. Kind of treat this as kind of like a little 101 crash course. We're going to be going over using Illumination Software Creator to build both Linux apps and Android applications. We're going to mostly be demoing building desktop Linux applications, particularly Python and GTK applications in this demo, but everything you're going to see here applies to Android, iPhone, iPad, etc. We'll do a quick overview first, and then we'll dive into the demo because that's a lot more fun with Illumination. The basic high-level premise is this. Illumination is a completely visual, and when I say completely visual, I mean entirely visual, think Lego colorful building blocks, way to build applications. It's very easy to learn. Anyone can kind of just pick it up and use it and experiment and play with it and not really know much about what they're doing. You can develop on Linux because there's a native Linux version available. You can even get it in the Ubuntu Software Center. There is Windows and Mac versions available also, but it's primarily a kind of a Linux-first development environment. The total target platforms we'll go to in a second. The other thing I want to touch on is the general core philosophy behind Illumination. That is, Illumination itself does not compile code. Illumination is essentially, you could think of it as a source code generator. You can use Illumination to create Python and GTK applications, Flash and Flex web applications, iPhone and iPad applications, Android applications, Memo applications, a wide variety of different applications, all from the exact same project file. But we don't technically compile, and the benefit there is that there are never any extra runtime environments. So if any of you it's a good way to think of it is compare it to Java. Java, you need a Java virtual machine in order to run your Java application. This obviously needs no virtual machine. The target platform that you are compiling for or building for is native. So if you build an iPhone app, it is a native Objective-C, 100% Objective-C iPhone application. On Android, it's in Java because that's the way you build Java or Android applications, and so forth. One other thing to note is, even though it is 100% visual, some of you might actually have some development experience and want to extend what Illumination is capable of. So we provide a functionality we call custom blocks, and that allows you to essentially use your programming background to build new visual blocks that do what you want them to do. So there's the platforms that we currently support. There are 2 more platforms coming, which I may or may not talk about later. We're just going to focus on these primary ones here. Python and GTK is kind of our primary Linux desktop target, since that runs very, very well on almost every Linux desktop out there. That was kind of the way to go. One other nice benefit there is, technically, because Python is not a compiled language, it's nice and interpreted, it's very easy to just hit the run button and you see your application instantly run without having to wait for a compiler, etc. You'll notice we also have a Python and GTK Memo target, which Memo is a essentially dead platform. It is a Linux distribution for mobile devices, but we allow a very specific custom target to run optimized applications for Memo. And we continue to maintain that because we're very big fans of Memo. All right, enough of that. So let's get into the demo. And I apologize ahead of time. The resolution going through the projector is just slightly smaller than the minimum size of Illumination Software Creator. It was not really meant for 640 by 480, but we're going to try and survive. So this is the basic user interface. This is the same user interface no matter what type of application you are developing. Android, desktop, it doesn't matter. What you see on the left-hand side are your list of blocks. Now over here, you have a little drop-down that gives you various categories, what types of blocks you're going to be using. User interface blocks, blocks that deal with numbers, blocks that handle logic, if statements and that sort of thing. And of course, your just general list of blocks. Down here in the bottom left-hand side is your variables. And just a quick go over of how variables work within Illumination. All variables are global, so if you create a text variable, it is available to your entire application. Which you may be saying to yourself, that's insane. Why would you ever do that? Don't you want to have a way to store data, discretely in individual functions, in individual classes and objects? And no, you don't, actually. It turns out, how many of you are currently actually developers? Okay, so most of the time what you find is that when you want to, let's say, create a desktop application, you create a new window, and let's say you want to put a button on that window. Your usage of variables in this case is going to be creating new button variables and variables for a particular viewport and that sort of thing in order to make the button appear. Within Illumination, absolutely none of that is ever necessary. The only time you're using variables is when you're storing data, when you're keeping data that your application is actually using. And in this case, it's just plain handy to have that data available always. So in this case, all variables are always global, which makes it very simple to figure issues out because you never have a scenario where certain data is only accessible to certain blocks. It's always accessible to all blocks. Now let's talk about blocks. The default application starts with this. This is your first project. Every time you start a new project, you get these blocks laid out like this. And you can, of course, delete them and add new blocks to your heart's content. But what this shows you is a basic functioning application. Now, every single application has to have two blocks. One is the application launched block, because every application launches. And you'll notice on the right-hand side is a little circle with kind of a piped output going from there. Basically, that says when the application is launched, do the next thing. And in this case, it's going to the window block, which has an open. And on the left, there's a little circle. Circles on the right are outputs. Circles on the left are inputs. Think of it like flowing water. There is no data passed between these blocks, none whatsoever. All you are determining here is the flow of the application itself, the actual logic flow. So application launched, go to window open. Okay, window is opened. Well, now when the window is closed, what do you want to do? Well, since this application does nothing else, let's quit the stinking application. So here's a quit application block. In fact, I could delete the window block and draw a line from application launched to application quit. And technically, you could compile this for iPhone, iPad, Python, what have you, and it would be a fully functioning application that would quit itself. All right. Now, so these are the blocks. Blocks are very simple. Now let's look here at the window block. We'll select it and we'll go ahead and pop it open. And here we have the window editor. Can we see all of it? Well, we can see most of it. Good enough. All right. Window editor is very simple. What you have is a window. You can move it around. You can resize it. And it's very, very fancy. We're going to actually go ahead and we're going to start developing a very, very simple application that does almost nothing of value. What we're going to do is you enter in a piece of text and it creates a new folder on your desktop. Because why not? So what we're going to do is we're going to just drag a text box on over to the window and it drops it over there. And we're going to resize it how we want it with a trackball, which is kind of cumbersome. There we go. Drop a button over here and let's put it over here. This is my super amazing UI. I'm not going to worry about setting anything super fancy here, but let's set some default text to hello, because hello world is boring. There we go. So now what we have is we have a window that actually says hello. Well, let's see it running. So let's go ahead and click Run App. And when you click Run App on the Linux version, you have two options that immediately pop up. One is Run Python. The second one is Run your Adobe Flash and Flex for web. We're going to go ahead and click Run Python. Before you can run a project, you got to save it. So let's save it as hello. There we go. Oh, look at that. here's our little window. It's our application running, and it doesn't do anything. We can type in it, but that's it. All right, let's close that because that's boring. So now let's move this quit block off to the side. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and remove this block, which, by the way, you can right-click on any block, and you get a set of contextual menu options that allows you to interact with that block, such as removing links, which these little pipes here we call links, or deleting the block itself. So we'll just go ahead and remove this note block because I already know what it does. So then let's say, okay, what do we want this to do? What do we really want this to do? We want this to be able to take the data from that text box that we added in there, and we want to put it in a variable so we can do something with it. So let's create a new variable. Click the little plus button down here, and let's add a variable name. And let's call this the path, because that's a really great variable name. And that's a little cut off there, but it actually has a T and an H on the side. Now, okay, so we have that as the path. So what else do we need? We're also going to need to be able to run some sort of a... Okay, the projector wants to jump around every time I click the button. That is driving me crazy. What in the heck? There we go. That is not Illumination Software Creator, ladies and gentlemen. But we want to be able to run a script. Let's say, Illumination has blocks that do all sorts of things, and one of them is basically a run a shell script command. So we're going to use that shell script to be able to create something on the desktop. So let's call it the command. And this is a text variable type. And then let's create I wanted to create another one. There we go. All right. And let's just call this one the makedir variable type, because we want to basically makedir desktop, and then we'll just leave netbook keyboard. There we go. Okay. So that makedir text variable is really just, the makedir command itself making a directory on the desktop. But we of course don't know exactly what we want it to be yet. So how do we get at that data? Well, we go ahead and select the user interface block type from here. Scroll. Oh, jeez. You've got to be kidding me here. Let's try this. All right. You are messing with me. Okay. Get text box. There's a get text box block. And what that really does is gets a text box. There we go. All right. So let's say every time the button is clicked. This is brutal. Is that going to be a little better? Yeah. All right. There we go. So every time the button is clicked, we want this block to happen. And what this block is going to do is say on this window, which is that window, which we have amazingly named window, and you can name it whatever you want. We want to take the text from the text box that we gloriously named text box, and stick it into a new variable. In this case, let's stick it into the path. And that's the path that will be created. So whatever we type in there is now going to be stuck into that text variable, which of course is completely useless. So let's go from there. What we need to do is take the new text we've added and shove it onto the end of the makedir command that we set earlier. So let's go to the text section, and there's a combine text block. So let's go ahead and combine the text. So the command, let's set that text variable to makedir plus, not that one, that one. There we go. And link those two up. So now we've got the command that we want to run. Now all we really have to do is run it. So let's take the shell script, drag it and drop it down, run the script that is located in this text variable, which is the command, link those two suckers up, and away we go. Hi there. Click that. Oh my gosh, I have a hi there folder on my desktop. It's super exciting and did absolutely nothing, and it's really, it's a very simple example, obviously. But really, if you had to do this from scratch in Python, what would this look like? So let's really think about this for a second, and in fact, let's go take a look. So we saved that as, let's see, we did that here, saved it here. Here is the source code that is generated by Illumination Software Creator to run this new Python application. It's fairly clean and fairly easy to read. However, that said, if you had to write this from scratch, while if you're an experienced Python GTK developer is not terribly difficult, it actually is fairly time-consuming. Whereas if I didn't actually have to talk through what I was doing, that takes about 40 seconds for me. Now, not all tasks in Illumination are going to be cut and dry, super easy. You can just crank it out and you're done. But in many cases, you can get the basic framework of an application up and running in an incredibly small amount of time. So that's kind of the basic overview there of how that works. In fact, for the devs in the audience who are interested, or if you're interested in what happens to your application once you've created it in Illumination, let's take a quick look at how this works. And this is getting a little bit nerdy. So here's the window block. That window block we created is given its own name that is unique and is maintained every time you build this particular Python application. Every block is a self-contained function. A good example is, let's say, the button clicked block. All the button clicked block did was it said, okay, go get the text box, and here's the get text box. It really just ran one line of code and then alerted the next function that it needs to run. The benefit here is that the code is incredibly clean, and if you decided you wanted to go in and modify this at a future date without Illumination and modify your own Python application, you can do so with very little worry about the rest of your application getting screwed up. I could go in here and delete 2 functions randomly, seemingly at random, and while I may have a little bit of work to do to make sure it still functions in a reasonable way, not very much. Because again, all variables are global. All variables are initialized from the very moment the application starts. There are no null variables. You will never get a null variable error with Illumination built applications, unless you do something very, very weird with the custom block, which I'll get into in a moment. So the great thing here is this removes 99% at least of the problems that developers run into when they're debugging their software. You're not hitting your null variables. There's no classes that are not properly initialized. All of that is taken care of for you. So that's kind of handy, I think. Now, one other thing I kind of want to touch on before I go a little bit further is in the UI editor. If you think about it for a minute, if you're building an application, let's just say we're building this same application for all the platforms. We want this on Android and iPhone and everything, even though, of course, Apple's not going to let you run shell scripts on an iPhone because they're jerks. But assuming you wanted this on all platforms, the UI is going to have to be different on all of them, every single one. And if you are a cross-platform developer, how many of you have made cross-platform software before? Okay, a couple of you. You know that can be a real pain in the butt. Even moving between Linux and Windows can be difficult with button sizing and control layout. That can be difficult. But when moving between mobile platforms, it's damn near impossible. So what we did is we decided that the logical flow of your application should never, ever, ever change under any circumstances, with a few exceptions, which we'll get to. But that the UI, you should be able to change freely. So what we said was, here in this editor, I want to design for any of the supported applications. So let's say I want this for an iPad. Well, here's you can't quite see it all because the resolution's not big, but here's a window that's hard locked to the actual size of an iPad window. And I can move the UI around however I want. I want my text down here and my button in the middle and that sort of thing. And that is only changing it for the iPad unless I check apply to all platforms, in which case it's applying that UI change to all platforms just to make things easy for you. But the great thing here is, let's go ahead and say okay to that. Nothing changed. Your layout for your applications don't change. Your logic flow does not change. Your names of your buttons, your names of your controls, nothing changes. The only thing that's changed is your layout. And you can do your layout per platform. And as Illumination has added additional platforms and targets, which we started with just Python, and we've added each new one over the last year or so, you don't have to do a thing except go in there and tweak that UI for that new target a little. Now, about all those different targets. Now, Python is obviously super easy on Linux because, well, it's Linux and Python is glorious. In fact, the Python applications are all GTK based. Sorry, Qt guys. GTK is a little more popular right now, so that's why we have it for that. But for the rest of the targets, Flash and Flex, which is very cool, Android, iPhone, obviously those need to be compiled. Those need to be built with the SDKs available from those individual vendors. But we tried to make it as easy as possible. So what we actually do is you can go in and say build for one of these many various platforms. Let's just go ahead and say build project for Android. And what it did is it went ahead and popped it open for me. What you see here is an entire Eclipse project ready to go out of the gate. In fact, I can build it directly from the command line or load this up in Eclipse itself. Everything is set for you. You will get no errors. It will run completely. The manifest is set. The UI is already designed. Nothing has to be done. Now, that means that there is a manual step there. If you want to deploy your applications on Android, that means you have to click 2 buttons. Sorry. I know that's rough, but it just really has to be done. Now, we've been doing our best to automate this process. We've been able to automate it for Flash applications. And what we do for Flash applications, and I can't really show you right now because Flash is completely busted on my Ubuntu 11.04 install at the moment. But if you go to our website, we have examples on our website. You can actually click for all of our examples, a live Flash example. And what we've gone ahead and done is mimic the desktop experience in the Flash experience. So if you are taking your application and building it for Flash, it's using what's called the Flex SDK, which is a predominantly open source SDK from Adobe. Of course, Flash is still proprietary. It actually, if you create a window, it creates a window within your website. So the nice part there is, let's say you make a cool new application for desktop Linux and maybe even for iPhone or Android. You can release a Flash-based demo version of it with a single click. And all you've got to do is either get really comfortable with the SDK command line tools, or we've gone ahead and made it so that all you got to do is download the SDK, find out where it is, click OK, and boom, run Adobe Flex Web. It will build a Swift for you, including build an HTML file for you that you can drag and drop to your web server, and you don't have to edit anything because we're cool. So we've done the same thing for iPhone and iPad. Basically, all it does is generate a complete Xcode project. Of course, you can't build those on anything other than a Mac because Apple won't let you. But if you do have a Mac, you can basically just go up here to the Run application, and there's an additional one here that just says, actually there's 2 additional ones, one for iPhone, one for iPad, since the UI is a little different, among a few other things. And just click Run. It generates a complete Xcode project, which any Mac developers in here or iPhone people? All right. So for you that is here, the nice thing about it is it generates a pure Objective-C application with no nib files, which means that your applications are actually significantly faster and smaller than almost anything you'll find in the Apple App Store, which is kind of cool because you can develop it entirely on Linux, test it out in Python, and then copy your file over to a Mac, run Illumination Software Creator, click Run, go, awesome. Change your icon because you want to have a pretty icon in the store and submit it up to the Apple App Store. So very, very cool there. Now, that is how to use it. That is really all there is to it. There's a lot of demos and tutorials up on the website with more coming all the time. And obviously there are many different things you can do. Different logic options, including the ability to target specific targets. Let's say you want your functionality to be different on an iOS device versus versus a Linux device. You actually can say, okay, when it's running on this particular target, do this logic, and then etc., etc. Everything, do while statements, etc. Oh, wait, look. Transparencies. Ooh, right? So there's a lot of functionality, there's a lot of flexibility here, and you can be really, really dumb and still use this. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, but it's true. I mean, you really can. Now, are you going to be able to build the biggest 3D game in this? No. I have no 3D functionality. In fact, in the current shipping version, there's really no 2D graphics functionality out of the gate. It is for building other types of applications currently. Version 3.2 is adding graphics. But you can do quite a bit with a custom block. You notice I selected custom from the list here, and there's nothing in there. Well, I want to make a new custom block. So I went to File, New Custom Block. Please fit in the window. Almost. Okay. So here's the idea here. How many Python developers in the room? How many developers again? We got a little more than half. All right, good enough. Here's the basic thing here. This is where you develop all of your custom blocks. It really is a sample code template system. You add in the name of your block, a description, what you want your input name to be. This is really for you because it just tells you what it does. And in fact, we generate, when you create a new custom block, it's a brand new block that does very, very little except takes a text variable as a parameter and sets it to hello, just to show you how to do it in each of the different languages. So basically, if you look along the right here, you see targets, different code for each type of target. Nice and simple, shows you how to do it, shows you that way if you get really lost and you're not doing it quite right, you can just kind of create a new block, look at how it's done, copy, paste it, and away you go. You can create up to 2 outputs, which people might say, oh, I need more outputs than that. You know, what if I want to take an input and then maybe have, 50 different outputs depending on 50 different scenarios? We're working on that. But for now, you've got 2 outputs, which for most people, that's usually enough. Most blocks tend to be of the input, output, one of each variety. Get this job done and move on. Especially if you're trying to add additional functionality, like let's say upload a file to an FTP site. That's actually a fairly simple one to do in almost all of these languages, which Illumination does not provide out of the gate. Luckily, all you really need is one input that says upload it, and one output that says, okay, I did already, and some inputs that are basically maybe a text variable that's the path to the file. And that's really all you need. Maybe you want to go a little further and add additional variables that say, how long it took. That way you can record it. Or another variable that says the result passed from the server. Now here's the thing. None of these variables are inputs, so I want to make this very, very clear. These are simply variables that block has access to. You are never saying, here, take this variable as an input parameter and give me this variable as an output. Input and output simply don't exist even as a concept here. You are simply saying, this block, you're allowed to touch this text. And that's all. And then from within that block, you can modify it and tell it whatever you want to do with that text. You want to read something from it, you want to write to it, you want to do both, you want to do all sorts of stuff. It does not matter. It's just what you have access to or not. You'll also notice up here at the top we have a little thing, a little import statement thing, and that really is just import statements. Since a lot of functionality you only need to have, it'll be difficult to create with just a simple function call. A lot of times you'll have to have a lot of include statements and the like, and that's where those would go. Once you've saved them out, which we'll go ahead and do right now, it's available. And in fact, once it's available, it is a .isb file, which you can pass around amongst your friends and trade them like Pokemon cards. There's already, if you go over to radicalbreeze.com, there's a forum in there where people tend to be creating various blocks for needs. Some people have created like SQLite blocks for handling some of that information. Some people have had inter-process communication blocks, just whatever it is that they come up with that they need at that point in time. Another fairly important tidbit here, the file format of both the custom blocks, the .isb, Illumination Software Blocks, and the Illumination Software Creator, the .isc projects, are all SQLite files. They are not locked down. They are not proprietary. We are not going to be changing them. We have not done a very good job of properly documenting them for everybody, but that is the intention. We encourage, if you want to make software that interacts with those projects, that works with those projects, we want you to be able to. The point here is to facilitate developers to do whatever it is they want, do it incredibly easily, and make it so people who have never developed software before have access to it and can in a kind of a fun way. Now, how many of you have used things like UML, like to visualize a project? A few. It kind of stinks, right? I mean, being able to show the layout, the functional flow of a project is hard. Plus, if you use tools like UML, once you create the functional layout of your software, you still have to go and build your freaking software. In fact, there are tools out there that have sought to take a flowchart-esque style and turn it into a functional application. They don't work. This works, and file, save project as image. You can save the darn thing as a gigantic JPEG picture, print it out on a plotter, and stick it on your wall. That's basically UML done right, since you have the actual flow of your application, the functionality of your application, and you have your actual application. Now, if you're building, let's say, oh, I don't know, LibreOffice. You want to build new LibreOffice. Can this do that? Absolutely not. There is almost no way out of the gate you could come up with that sort of functionality with Illumination. But you can actually get a lot of it there. You can get maybe 60% of the UI done, because of course it's kind of a complicated UI. You can get a lot of your basic workflow done. You can get to the point where you could build a basic text editor, and you can go a little bit further. But once you're done, you can take that resulting project file, those source code that's in the language that you want it in, and extend it further and use it as basically a rapid prototyping tool. So we've kind of built this with a number of things in mind. Now, so we've talked about a lot of the different ways to go, and I want to make it very clear how we're approaching the cross-platform aspect of this, because one of the key tenets here is that we as developers creating an application never, ever, ever again want to be stranded on a platform. If you are making a very cool application, let's say for Mac OS 9.0 or something like that, of course no one uses that anymore, right? But what if it was a really cool application? Don't you want to make it available to Windows, to Linux, to everything else? And what if all of a sudden all of your sales, let's say you sold it, stopped on the desktop platforms, and you were like, man, I need to get into this whole mobile bandwagon. You want to be able to bring all of that hard work with you with as little work as possible, preferably no work at all, if at all possible. We want to get as close to that as humanly possible. That's a big part of this goal. And we've come a long way. This project originally launched about a year ago, again, with just Python support. You can already build for the 2 major mobile platforms, along with every major desktop platform and websites. So I'd say we're doing fairly well. That's the basic gist of it. That's how to use it. There really isn't a lot more to it than that. I mean, it's straightforward. It's simple. Oh, except you can make notes. And you can type in whatever you want and say, hello, or some facsimile thereof. That's it. Any questions?
Couple from our chat room.
What are the questions from the chat room?
One folks wants to know if it can parse non-ISC code.
No. So if you have a project that's built for Android already, you cannot import that into Illumination Software Creator, simply because we handle things very differently. Any other questions?
Another folk in our chat room wanted to know what other languages you might be working on.
We're working on a quote-unquote HTML5 target and a don't shoot me Windows Phone 7 target. Well, if you think about it, what else is left? Linux, Windows, Mac, Mamo, and Migo, though we call it just Mamo, iPhone, iPad, Android. we'll add Windows Phone 7, and we have Flash already, so we'll add an HTML5 target. We've talked about adding a haiku target. I'm not joking, we have about half of it done in-house already. It's just a matter of deciding what the heck we do with it once we finish it. I mean, that is the thing. We've been able to expand to the point where we're looking at things like, well, how about Amiga OS 4? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a lot of great options. MIPS would be great. I mean, what was that? Mix? Mix. Okay. We'll talk about that later. Okay. The conference? Okay. But this is what I'm saying. So there's not a lot of options left. I mean, really, we're getting into sub-niches of a niche. I mean, what are we going to do? Classic Mac OS 8 applications? I mean, well, that's what we're looking at. Yeah. So there's Qt as a target, but really doesn't give us a new platform per se. That just gives us a new target, which we're looking at doing anyway, because we're going to run out of places to go. So we're adding in additional functionality. The next version is adding in graphics functionality, a new variable type that is basically dictionaries, which is very, very handy. So doing key value pairs and that sort of thing, and doing basic web services. So, any more questions?
I attended this lecture taught by somebody named Bryan yesterday about supporting Linux and all that, and what works and what doesn't work. And what this guy said is that, like, if it has corporate support, it works great.
Yeah.
If there's a huge database, user base that supports it, it works great. Tell me about the support for this.
So Illumination Software Creator is run by my company, which is called Radical Breeze, which is a small startup company of 2 people. And this is what we've done in the last year. We've got a fairly dedicated, loyal following at this point over the last year, especially within the last 3 to 4 months. It's really started to explode for us. We sell this software. It's commercial, closed source, and proprietary as can be, except for the file formats and the fact and how we treat the projects. And we do that because we need to be able to continue funding support and development of it. We would love nothing more than to be able to release the entire source code to all of this open source. We have yet to be able to find a viable way that we can accomplish that. If any of you come up with a actually tested model where this can happen, we will do it in a heartbeat. This will become open source. In the meantime, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that the file format's open source, that the projects that are created are unencumbered by any licenses, by any runtime files, and have nothing proprietary in them, so anyone can take them and release the resulting projects as GPL'd. We want to make sure that that's a absolutely core bit of functionality, and we won't add any new functionality to Illumination that breaks that. That's just kind of that's our personal philosophy on everything. It's important to us. So we support it via software sales. It sells through the Ubuntu Software Center, and it also is available through the Mac application store, the Mac App Store, for Mac users. And that's how we continue to fund development. Yeah, and it is under full-time development. It's not a hobby. Any other questions?
Is the code output neutral enough to learn from, so that maybe you could, if you want to do something really complicated, yes, you start?
Absolutely. So if you want to learn from it, that's actually a great example. So let's say you want to use this as simply a learning tool for learning how to develop for any of these applications. Here's a good example. Here is the function that it is the window block. This goes ahead and creates the window in Python with all of the controls and sets them all up and lays it out. It adds no code that is not necessary. It adds only the code that is. So if you want to learn from it, this is a great way to go. I mean, it's going to ensure that everything you're looking at is accomplishing exactly what you set out to accomplish. So if you want just a window with a button on it, here is the exact code that results in a window with a button on it. No need to Google, try and hash through a bunch of example code from a number of different individuals. You simply drag and drop a button on it, create the file, and look at what you've created. And it's a great way to learn new languages, and it's a great way to kind of just use as a reference, honestly. There are a couple of times when we're actually developing Illumination. This has happened a lot because I'm not much of a Flash developer currently. So I kind of looked at it and I thought, you know, I needed to fix a few things. I'm like, well, how do I add a button again to a Flash window? So I loaded up Illumination. I'm like, oh, that's how we're currently doing it. So I could copy that code and use it somewhere else. It was actually faster to do that for me than look in the code that generated itself and look in my notes. So using Illumination to learn from is very quick and very peppy.
Now, you said that you can develop it in Linux and then you can just move it over to a Mac and then generate for the Mac. Do you have to buy another license for the Mac?
No, sir, because we are not jerks. So, in fact, here's the quick licensing spiel. We charge for Illumination. In fact, we used to charge a set your own price, was what we used to have, because we want everyone to be able to have access to it. We hit a point where we also wanted to get it into the Ubuntu Software Center and the Mac App Store, neither of which support variable pricing. They require you to have a price. So we set it at a price that was cheaper than most video games. That's what we decided it as. We're like, you know what if someone wants to play with this? So we looked at what video games cost, and we subtracted $10, and that was our price. The licensing, we are currently at version 3.1. We have never charged for an upgrade. We have no plans to charge for an upgrade. And that is not a veiled way of saying, not in 3.2, but that literally is, I can't foresee the point at which we will be charging for an upgrade. If there hits a point where we have the saturation of every user that ever wants to use this is already using this and we still want to keep developing it, well, of course, we'll probably need to charge some sort of minor upgrade fee to keep developing it. But that point is, in my opinion, a long ways off. Also, it's available for all three major platforms. The license code, if you purchase it from our website, we have control over that. We give you a code that works on Linux, Windows, and Mac. You can run freely between them. It's good on all machines, and you as a developer can use it on as many machines as you want at the same time. And it will go a step further. If you're using it at home, it applies to anyone in your house as well. If you're in a business, come on, buy multiple copies. But if you're not in a business and this is your personal thing and maybe your kid wants to use it, maybe your kid wants to play around with his bedroom, just give him the license code. We intentionally have left this ambiguous because we want you guys to be able to use it. Now, we are specifically saying you can't just willy-nilly give it out, but if it's in your own home, of course, use it on as many machines as you've got, and whatever the platform. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
One person in our chat room wants to know if you can explain more of the type of graphics support that will be coming soon.
The graphics support that's coming soon is 2D graphics. We're basically adding a new control. It's a canvas control with a couple of things so you can click it and make custom buttons and that sort of thing, along with some basic drawing blocks so you can draw and have some basic vector graphics design capabilities. That's really about it. The idea is that you should be able to be enough to make a 2D game. Not just like tic-tac-toe, but maybe something with a little animation, because we're adding in, enough functionality that you can make some 2D animation across all platforms without worrying about things like double buffering and etc., because it's all handled for you, again, in a cross-platform, open source friendly way.
What's the timeline?
For the next version?
Yeah.
The next version was set to hit beta last Thursday, but didn't. If that gives you any indication. So no, it's going to be going into beta. We do betas from blog.radicalbreeze.com throughout every release cycle. We usually do 3 or 4 betas. We've never gone more than a few months between releases, if that helps any. It's been 2 months since the last release. My guess is it'll be about a month before the final 3.2 release is out.
Demo, you used a shell script to create a folder. So it would be up to us to know to write the shell script to verify that we aren't going to wipe out something.
Yeah, we give you enough powerful. The shell script block would allow you to do darn near anything because it literally just runs a shell script on your system. So yeah, it would be up to you to realize that you're not doing a complete removal of every file on your system. The good news is, most actions that you commit in a command line require you to either know ahead of time that it's going to be removing everything, because it usually prompt you, like, you want to continue, you need administrator access, you need root access to this, and requires you to type something in, which you can usually get around with a little bit of, command line foo, but you usually have to know what you're doing there. Right. Yes, exactly. You have to, lots of semicolons.
Slash would be a bad option.
So
yes, no RMs dash R. Yeah.
So you're saying that you have a marketplace or something for other modules that might be able to actually create a folder?
So we don't have a current marketplace. We're actually posting a wiki shortly here that will be kind of a clearinghouse for custom blocks, for people to be posting and categorizing their own custom blocks that they will be releasing as open source to everybody. Currently, it just happens in our forum, which is at our support forum there at radicalbreeze.com, and people just will tend to post requests saying, like, how the heck do I accomplish this? And sometimes a day or two later, you see someone actually post a block that does it, which is very, very nice. And other times people just post what they've been working on for their own projects. So right now it's very community driven from the custom block side of things. We're formalizing it a little bit, but we want to keep it very, very loose, because we don't want to presume what people want to create. We want to make it easy to create anything, but we don't want to presume. So we're going to continue adding functionality to it and continue adding new platforms to it and new features that will make it continually easier. We're adding, for instance, something we call Megabloks, which we are not actually going to call Megabloks because that's patented by people who make Megabloks. But the basic idea is that you could take, let's say, all of these blocks, which would be silly because you have application launch and quit and all that, and bundle them up in a big block, like a block container, a box of blocks. And basically, so you could make it very easy to componentize your application and make it even more modular and to make it more accessible for really big applications. I saw an application one time that was so big it made my head explode. A gentleman made, and this is one of my favorite applications, I use an example a fair bit, made a dungeon master tool, basically for handling everything in relation to the D&D games that he dungeon mastered. Now, when you think at first, that's really, okay, well, that's fine. And you do that with a pencil and paper, no big deal. But it turns out that's, immense, innumerable character sheets and things happening within the games and random dice rolls of various types and sizes. And it became this huge application. And he spent so much time organizing it that it looked like a work of art. But it confused the heck out of me what it did. And I realized looking at it, because you can organize these blocks however you want, and I can drag this over here and have this over here, and you start noticing, well, these lines are going everywhere. And if you lay out your application well, this actually makes a lot of sense, because you can, go ahead and put your window here, and the quit goes over here, and, you put your text box over here, and you can actually make it so it makes visual sense what's happening, much like a nicely laid out flowchart. But nothing says that you have to, which means, because we're not enforcing beauty here, that you could make something really ugly. So what if you inherited an Illumination project from someone who made something very ugly? You'd want some way to make it very modular, and that's one of the reasons we're expanding that functionality. So,
yeah. What about using Unicode as an input? I do a lot of stuff with native languages. So.
It's supported on some of the targets, but not Python currently. And that's, honestly, that's more of a limitation of Illumination than anything else. There's a few issues with PyGTK and Unicode. It works, but it has some quirks. And we're trying to work around those currently. And we hope to have that as part of probably not the next beta, but sometime thereafter and fixed up. Because currently Unicode works well on, let's say, Android. Android builds work well. You can use Unicode. In fact, BiDi text even works quite well, but not currently for Python. So we're trying to make sure there's full parity of functionality, even in terms of using Unicode and various languages across all platforms. It's not always 100%, but we're very, very close. Any other questions? Yes.
Are there any projects that are similar to Illumination?
Are there any projects that are similar to Illumination? Dear God, no. We created Illumination because no one else was doing it, and we thought that was the most ridiculous thing we'd ever heard in our lives. I mean, if you look in the past, there have been many graphical development environments, many of them, and many of them have been incredibly interesting. And I'm not going to name them here if you Google for them, because I don't want to badmouth many of them. I've become friends with a few of the engineers of some of the more old school ones, and they've done great work. But no one has done it right. No one has done it from the point of view of, let's make something that doesn't require a VM. Let's make something that's infinitely extensible. Let's make something that is beautiful and has transparencies. No one has tackled that before, and I thought, this is 2011, well, 2010 when we were first released. I mean, if you follow, the movies, 2010, the movie was subtitled The Year We Make Contact, because we make contact with this being from a baby floating in space and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And yet we don't have a way to visually lay out software yet? Really? Really? We don't have that yet? So we made it. And it's been a lot of work, and nothing quite does this. Nothing does this. Microsoft has a visual programming language that allows kind of visual layout, but it's kind of more geared towards simplified robotics. And then they created another one that is kind of more geared towards office automation, but it's very simplified, and it's really more of a way of visually laying things out. The other thing that people may have heard of is the thing called the Android App Inventor, which Google released this tool that is a visual tool to allow you to create visually Android applications. Very cool tool. However, incredibly limited and very poorly designed. The issue with that is, and I don't know have any of you actually looked at Android App Inventor? A couple of you. It's not actually a visual development tool. It's a standard development tool using your mouse. Whereas in this case, I would have, let's say, a do-while block. So I dragged over this block, and I can kind of interact with it in a purely visual way. Well, you have an Android App Inventor is really a fully typed out, fully text-based do-while, 1 less than 3, and it really is fully typed out. It's just that you have a limited subset of things that you can type, and you have to drag and drop them into place. So what you end up with is a great way to visually see what is available as a developer, but no way to speed up your development. Whereas using an Illumination, you can go incredibly fast. Using Android App Inventor, it slows you down tremendously. The flip side of that, of course, is that Illumination is also way more powerful. Android App Inventor, you make Android apps that you can't sell in the marketplace because they're actually not native Android apps. What they are is they're running under a runtime environment that's basically JavaScript applications. It's running a thing called Wooby, and basically means that it's great for building your own apps for playing with, for running on your own devices, maybe your friends' devices and your emulator, but not in the marketplace. You can't really sell it in the marketplace or give it away in the marketplace currently. Hopefully that changes. Hopefully Google fixes that, because I've made a lot of fun of them for doing it. But currently it's very limiting, and of course no support for every other platform on the planet, and that's important. Yeah.
In the programming environment, how do you support or read data from sensors in the mobile device, like accelerometer, microphone? How's that work?
Custom blocks.
Okay.
We've thought long and hard about exactly how to do that, and we very likely may be adding in a large amount of device-specific functionality in the future. It's not going to be in the next 2 updates, because we just decided, you know what, there's enough amazing things that every platform can do. We're going to focus on those, yeah, we're going from there first. We're building, along with the next release, we're building a couple sample applications. One is a Twitter client, and one is a simple little, kind of reversey style game. So we're trying to show people more what really can be accomplished, because while we're seeing applications being released with it, we still get a lot of questions about what you can do with it, and it becomes very difficult to show people unless you have a full set of applications on the website with screenshots, which we're trying to rectify. But no, if you want to handle sensors, for the most part, you've got to hop on into there to the custom blocks and do it yourself. Yes.
Rikai from our chat room wants to know if the note block can ever be incorporated into the actual code as code comments.
You know what? Not currently, but everyone keeps asking for that, so we're probably going to add it in, which basically just means that this note block will have a dot on both sides of it that will be an input and output, and nothing will happen, but it will just basically generate comments for your code if you really want it. But no, currently the note block is just there for taking notes to visually organize your stuff. Like I could write a note that says, hey, this is where my window is created. Any more questions? You, all the way on the left first. Sorry.
I may have missed this. I came a little late. Is this something that would, say, generate code for like Arduino, or is there a possibility of it?
There's a possibility for it generating code for anything. Right now, we're focusing on the major platforms and the major specific platforms. So currently, it's just Android, Java for Android, Objective-C for the iOS platforms, Python and GTK for desktops and mobiles, and ActionScript and MXML for Flash and Flex. All right, who is next? You.
Do you have a more complicated example that you can show, or a custom block that you can show the guts of just briefly? Or is it...
The best way to go, actually go to the website. There's a couple of examples up on the website that do marginally more complicated examples, little quiz games and things like that, that can kind of walk you through what larger or mid-sized applications really look like. That's probably the best way to go from radicalbreeze.com. I don't have a lot of stuff downloaded here. Any other questions? Going once? All right, cool. So, let's go back to slideshow here. So you get to see now the amazing last one. All right, that's it. So that's the entire thing. So as you can see, I mean, the real important thing here is we spent almost all the time talking about, implementation details and question and answering. Going through and learning how to do it is stupidly simple. We actually got a little bit of guff early on because we posted a couple PDF tutorials on our website that were 5 pages long with really big pictures. So I mean, it looked like we were the laziest people on the planet. But the reality is, unless you want us, unless you want the 101 introduction tutorial to include, here is literally what every single block does, then it's only going to be like 2 pages long unless I include some really big pictures. So it's amazingly simple to use. It's amazingly simple to learn, and it's improving all the time. We added iPhone and iPad support in 3.0. 2.0 saw the Android side of things. I think version 1. Something or other added Flash, and we are adding 2 more in the near future. So at that point, we literally will dominate the entire planet in terms of what we can develop for, except for Android and Haiku, which would be cool. All right, that's all I got. Thanks, everybody, and check out the website, check out the things, check out the forum if you have any more questions. Pretty helpful community in there, and yeah, enjoy.